Many thanks. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here today and to be in the presence of so many leaders who have shaped my thinking and my work so profoundly. When I was in seminary 20 years ago, there were no courses in theological seminaries in the United States and North America about the religious basis for protecting the environment. If there were, they were extremely few and far between. So those of us who've gotten engaged in this work have really been self-taught, and people like Bill and many others and many who've been here at Bioneers over the years have played a key role in that. What I'd like to do today in the time that I've got with you is to share with you a little bit about both the why and the what. The question of why it is that religious institutions and religious communities are an important part of addressing environmental concerns, and then really to go from preaching to meddling, to use the old metaphor, to talk about what they can do and are doing and need to be doing more of. And it's fun with the 25-minute limit. Some of the churches I preach in, they only want you to preach for 12 minutes, so this is great. Other churches I preach in, 25 minutes is just a warm-up, so I have to sort of peg it somewhere in the middle here. At any rate, GreenFaith is an interfaith environmental organization, and we work with faith groups around the country to help them take action to protect the environment. And the first question that I want to get at is really this question of why. And I think there are two dimensions to it. One of those dimensions is very worldly. The reality is that religious communities around the globe, with no insult intended to Facebook, remain in very real terms the largest social network on the planet. You see the facts up there on the screen, and it's very interesting because in Europe, obviously, the power of organized religion is diminished greatly, and in this country, although you wouldn't always be able to guess it from the headlines, it's diminished also in certain ways over the last 40 years. But the fact of the matter is that organized religion's reach and scope is literally unparalleled. And so that's one of the reasons that it's so important, I think, that these traditions be involved in this and get involved. I think another reason that religion is an important ally in these issues is that very often religious communities are strongest where environmental leadership is weakest. Religious communities are frequently very influential in the moderate to conservative wings of cultures around the world. It's not the only place that they're influential, but it's definitely one of them. And what we find over and over again is that when the unlikely messenger, such as a conservative religious leader, steps up and speaks about climate change, it's worth, and I mean this literally in terms of the impact, it's worth 10 of us liberals getting up and speaking about it for the simple reason that it's an unexpected messenger. Yesterday in the Orlando Sentinel, we had an op-ed placed by Reverend Richard Cizik and Pastor Joel Hunter. Pastor Hunter is the pastor of one of the largest megachurches in the country, saying that Florida needs to wake up and deal with climate change and recognize that climate change is a massive threat as soon as possible. And the fact that you've got someone of Joel Hunter's stature investing his time and his energy and his political capital in that is really significant. It's not to say that relations are always easy or unruffled between conservative religious leaders and environmentalists, but there's an enormous opportunity for common ground. So there's a real sort of prosaic, worldly reason that this alliance makes sense, but there's another reason which runs deeper than that, and I want to spend a couple of minutes on that, and it's really the question of values. The fact that what religion deals with is, and there are two ways to say it. You can say that religion deals with the irrational dimension of human existence or the beyond rational dimension of human existence. I prefer the latter. It sounds a little bit less pejorative. But the reality is that religion is good at engaging people at the depth of their being. People know that religion is there at times of people's greatest joy, at times of people's greatest sorrow, at times of people's greatest stress, at times of people's greatest need. And the bottom line is that old saying about no atheists in the foxhole has some truth to it. When people are under stress, They need help from beyond themselves. And whether one views that as coming from a higher power or as coming from the depths of the human spirit, whatever, I mean, we don't really care. The reality is that we need resources that are greater than ourselves, and religion has that to offer. We've found consistently in our work with people of diverse faiths, diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, that there is a tremendous underutilized asset at the disposal of the environmental community, and I want to say a few things about that right now. I have a son who is 16 years old. About 5 years ago, I got him a Game Boy. It was the worst decision I've ever made. Public confession is good for the soul, right? And so after I got him this thing, and it really wasn't as an act of repentance, though I guess it might sound that way, we went out to the Rockies, out to southwestern Montana to hike for a week and camp for a week. So this guy, he's 9 or 10 years old. He's in the car playing with his Game Boy on the way to the airport. You fly out of Newark Airport. He's got his Game Boy on. You know, once you get up over 10,000 feet and the stewardess comes on and tells you you can turn your electronics back on, like you can turn your life support system back on. So on comes the Game Boy. We land at the other end of the flight, and he's still diddling around with it in the back seat. We get to the trailhead where we're starting, and I watch this 9-year-old boy get out of the car. And he looks around him at these massive 10,000-foot-tall mountains that are stretching up towards the sky like these enormous muscles coming up out of the earth. And he looks up at these elegant, majestic pine trees reaching 150 feet straight up towards the sky. And he not only sees, but he hears and he feels coming up through his legs the impact of this tremendous river that's crashing through its banks about 50 yards away, filled up almost to overflowing with snowmelt from the mountaintops. And out there, you breathe the air. It's clear, it's crisp. It goes right down into the deepest part of your guts. And for the next week that we were out there, the Game Boy was history. Didn't want it once. Right, yeah, absolutely. This is not a story about my son. And this is not a story about children. This is a story about every human being on the face of the earth. Because we know from conversations with people of every single imaginable religious tradition that every single person has deeply meaningful spiritual experiences outdoors. Our Native American forebears must be cringing at the irony of us recognizing this now. But it's a reality, and what's more interesting, we find we do a lot of small group discussions where we invite people to share these stories. People can remember them within 5 seconds, so they're not deeply repressed memories. You don't need 5 years of therapy to access them. But what's interesting is that less than 5% of all people have ever shared these stories in any kind of public setting. And that's because they realize that there's a taboo out there in society. You know, in our society, we have 2 places where people can talk lovingly about the environment: with their pets and with gardens. After that, people know that they are starting to run the danger of crossing that thin line from the sane to the insane. And they don't want to go there. And so what we've got is this tremendous reservoir of powerfully positive, transformative spiritual experience that is lying largely untapped. And one of the things that we talk about religious institutions needing to do is to find ways to cut those stories loose, to liberate them, so that they can see the light of day and do the work that they need to do. We've started to say to our more conservative religious brothers and sisters, who are we to be ashamed of the ways in which God speaks to us through the earth? Now, there's another dimension to this, because the truth of the matter is I spend a fair amount of my time speaking with religious people who are often somewhat skeptical or anxious about environmentalism. And I spend a certain amount of time speaking with a number of environmentalists who are understandably skeptical about organized religion. And one of the major sticking points for a lot of environmentalists is the passage from the book of Genesis in the Jewish Bible and in the Christian Bible, where God gives humankind dominion over the planet. It's one that's, yeah, I mean, you get it, right? It's not a passage that's comfortable. So I'm going to describe to you how I speak about that in conservative religious circles. I tell them that there's a lot about that passage that rubs me wrong. I also say that I think that it's probably wise at this point to understand that verse from the Bible not as a value judgment, but rather as a statement of fact. Because the reality is that, like it or not, we have power, an enormous amount of it. You just heard the facts that Bill McKibben shared about the fact that we impact every major ecosystem on the face of the planet in a way that no other organism can even dream of doing. Not that they'd want to, but... And so the reality is, I think that the challenge that comes to people of faith, people of that particular book, if you will, is not whether we've got power or not, but really how we use it. And I think that the very rightful and understandable disagreement or discomfort that many people have with that text is that what they think it says is they think it says that we have the right to exploit the earth. And that's not what it says. It's a statement of power, and power is morally neutral, can be used for good or for ill. And the challenge is really clear. The third reason on the values front that I think that engaging faith communities in this work is important is that oftentimes I have found that many environmental leaders have a difficult time speaking about the values that undergird their work. And what that does is that it to some degree limits their ability to reach beyond the cultural and political and spiritual left. One of the things that we have found is that most of the conversations we have about the environment with more conservative religious leaders are actually not conversations about the environment at all. They're conversations about the role of government. And when we get past that initial sort of tidal wave of resistance and start to talk with people about the places that they've been outdoors where they have experiences of God in nature, the tone and the tenor of the conversation changes profoundly. All of a sudden, they realize they've got a dog in the fight, so to speak. They realize they are literally invested. And when we go through these environmental values exercises as we describe them, I did one up at a Catholic college outside of New York just a week or so ago. Here was a list of the values, the environmental values that got named: respect, honor, integrity, identity, friendship, respect, honesty, compassion, respect, peace, calm, respect, love, respect. And it goes on and on. These are not sort of lefty values. I mean, these are profound, eternal moral values, and they are there in relationship to people's relationship to the land. Again, we have to blush in the presence of so many of our Native American leaders who again, what must this sound, to hear white people discovering this? But it's there, and we need to do something about it. We need to lift up these voices more. On a real practical level, when we work with religious institutions, what we find is that they perceive that the biggest hurdle that stands between them and engaging environmental issues is money. They perceive that it's going to cost them a bucket to do something about this. It's ironic because we've actually found that we're the best cost-saving opportunity that religious institutions have because they can engage energy conservation and save quite a bit. What really costs in terms of this work, Hugo alluded to this earlier, is the fact that they're going to need to pay attention. And let me do an experiment here. Would you please raise your hand if you're not too busy? All right, well, we've got more than... I mean, there's a national disease out there of everybody being too busy. And what that does, and this is a spiritual issue, what that does is it diminishes people's capacity to pay attention. And in order to engage environmental concerns, what we say to the congregations we work with is that we're not going to cost you money, but you do need to pay attention. You do need to be awake. You need to attend. And then we'll be able to deal with the knowledge and the skills that you're going to need to do this work. We'll work with you in terms of the beliefs and the values, and we'll save you money in the meantime. In terms of the very practical things that we do a lot of work in the areas of helping religious institutions integrate these themes into all different areas of their lives, their worship, their religious education, their spiritual practices through resources such as the ones named on the screen. We help religious institutions develop sustainable consumption habits, working with them on energy conservation, sustainable food, toxics and waste reduction. One of the favorite activities for a lot of the congregations we work with is to do a waste audit. They have their teenagers spread out a tarp and pour a week's worth of trash out, and they sort it. And they see that they can recycle 50% of what they're chucking into the landfill. And the trick we've found with those is to make sure that you require any teenager who gets to pour out the trash to commit to helping pick it up afterwards. Otherwise, they're not dumb. They take off quickly. But we find that, as Hugo said, there are somewhere between 350 and 400,000 religious institutions, houses of worship in this country. If even 10% of them adopted these habits seriously and then taught their members about how to take these habits home, we'd see some substantial benefits. And also, frankly, what it would do would be it would broaden the base of people that would be available to advocate for and to support the kinds of policies that we need. We have an online green building resource for religious communities. A good friend of ours, a filmmaker named Judith Helfand, said that religious institutions shouldn't just build buildings, they should build just buildings. And so we've created our Building in Good Faith resource as a way of saying to these religious communities, here are the tools. You're in your building religious institutions much longer than the average commercial enterprise. You can accept a mission-consistent, longer payback investment. So do it. We do a lot of work in the area of environmental justice, environmental racism, and environmental injustice. And interestingly, while this has been an area that, from our perception, many mainstream environmental groups have not engaged as vigorously as they might have, religious institutions understand this because an awful lot of institutions, religious institutions, for an awfully long time, have been focused on dealing with issues of injustice. A lot of institutions fighting hunger, fighting homelessness, fighting poverty. They understand that very often it's those vulnerable communities that get disproportionately impacted, and they're willing to engage on that level. Several years ago, we realized that there really was not any central training and organizing hub to bring together people from around the country in religious communities who wanted to engage these concerns. So we created our fellowship program as an 18-month experience for clergy and lay leaders nationwide to come together, to study, to learn, to get the practical skills, to write an eco-theological statement based on their own experience and their tradition, and to carry out a leadership project. We've now got 115 fellows around the country in 3 Canadian provinces, 29 states, our first European fellow this year, from all of the different religious traditions that you see listed there on the screen. This is our effort to create a movement incubator within the religious environmental movement, to be a place where people get trained and equipped and come together. Several years after that, we realized that there were more and more congregations that wanted to do this seriously, but they needed a roadmap in order to do that. And so we created our certification program for houses of worship, a 2-year process that's highly structured and highly resourced, during which time religious institutions integrate environmental themes into their worship, their religious education, their spiritual practices, 7 different areas of facility management, their members' consumption habits at home, They do education and advocacy about those environmental justice issues I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. They do a lot of communication, both within and to their larger community. They conduct interfaith work because that's what we're about. They do multi-generational projects. The projects have been inspiring and a tremendous success. One of our favorite stories is we've worked with a church in the program right in the heart of Texas, and they put in the first electric car charging station in the church parking lot in their county. And they were clear that it was a little bit of a build it and they will come. But they did it as a statement. And with all of this stuff, keep in mind that there is that beyond rational symbolic power that religious institutions can use rightly to make a larger impact than what's applicable just to their own setting. We found that a lot of institutions aren't able to make the commitment to a large program such as the certification program, so we've created our GreenFaith Shield program, which we're launching this winter. It's our equivalent of the Scouting Merit Badge, where a religious institution can earn an energy shield, or a water shield, or a food shield, or a waste shield, all of that sort of thing, taking a limited but meaningful number of steps to green the way that their institution operates, to offer the opportunity to participate to the wider community, to make a meaningful, measurable environmental impact. That'll be something that we'll release later this winter. This year, in light of the election, we've been launching our Good Steward campaign. It's the piece that I mentioned earlier about having that op-ed policed in Florida. We've worked with evangelicals largely in the 18 to 40-year-old age range in swing states in a number of different places around the country. What we find is that there's an extremely hopeful generational transition that's happening in the evangelical community, where all of a sudden for people in this age range that I'm talking about, the moral universe does not any longer revolve around abortion and gay rights. It revolves around feeding the hungry and about taking care of creation. And we think that it's a tremendously hopeful movement and one that we hope to accelerate. I want to close by saying a few final words about, I think, a unique contribution that religion can play. A number of years ago in South Asia, in a number of different places, Buddhist monks were observing forests getting cut down. And what happened when they saw those forests cut down was that the communities that they were investing their lives in caring for and protecting, those communities were decimated. The forest got cut down, the soil washed away, the people became impoverished, all kinds of violence and social problems erupted, all because the trees were cut down. And so one day, a small group of these Buddhist monks, none of them terribly influential on their own, decided that they were going to go out into a forest and ordain a tree. Now, in Buddhist circles, it is possible to view a feature of the natural world, a tree, a river, a rock, a landscape, as a spiritual mentor. The idea that one can grow spiritually in relationship to that larger member of the community of creation. And so what these monks did was they walked out and they spread that beautiful orange saffron robe around the tree. And all of a sudden they realized that the loggers weren't quite so happy about cutting these trees down. There was something intangible that had happened. All of a sudden these trees fell under a moral canopy that hadn't previously covered them. And I think that that's one of the things that religions can and need to do. What would it look like if hundreds or thousands of churches around this country started baptizing trees? What would it look like if synagogues around this country began recognizing trees or landscapes or animals or plants as daughters and sons of the Torah? Religious rituals have power. Religious communities need to use them. If you belong to such a community, I hope you'll speak to me or be in touch, because we're eager to reach out. I'm afraid that I'll close by saying that because of a previous commitment that was scheduled before I was invited to Bioneers, we have a significant event starting tomorrow morning in Milwaukee. I'll be leaving this afternoon. There's a wonderful afternoon workshop on this topic, a chance to continue the conversation that you see information about on the screen there, and my contact information is there. But in closing, what I want to say is that the energy and the spirit that is here, that is a core part of who you all are and what Bioneers is about, joined with the moral and spiritual commitment that exists in religious communities around the planet, is an unstoppably powerful force. We need to build these bridges, we need to nurture them, we need to strengthen them, because by doing so, together, we can build the blessed community, and there is no greater gift. Thank you.